Welcome back. We're going to look at this thing called expressions. Expressions in algebra is how we display our numbers. There are some things to remember about expressions, and I'd like to take some time and get everyone back up to speed with what exactly is an expression. We call them algebraic expressions. Expressions have certain pieces to them that you guys need to know because there was one thing I noticed in many of my math classes. People showed up to my algebra and in some cases geometry classes, and I expect them to know things like combining like terms. And I would mention to them, can you see two like terms in that expression? And they look at me like I got two heads. That's because the pieces to an algebraic expression, these pieces, many students don't get them up front. They kind of move on without getting them, and they end up having problems later on in math. And even in the case of distant learning, if you're not solid about what expressions are, you will see an expression, it may look kind of complicated, and for whatever reason, you would just walk away from it because this is just too hard for me to do. So today, we're going to take all of the mystery out of algebraic expressions. The first thing we want to talk about in algebraic expressions are these things called variables. Variables refer to something in this math problem that I don't know. That's all it is. There's nothing more to it. It is what I don't know. And the most popular expression or variable that you would have seen in your lifetime is x. Now that can be anything. It can be a y, it can be a c, it can be a p, it can be just about any letter that you can think of can be a variable. Later on in algebra, you're going to learn that there are some letters you try to avoid using them as variables because they have other meanings. Down the road, you will find that B or C have some different meanings, and F has a different meaning, and so often you would find in later algebra that mathematicians and algebra teachers and advanced students, such as in the calculus world, they try to avoid using some letters as variables. But for now, we're doing basic algebra, so you are welcome to use any letter in the alphabet to express what is a variable. Now, after variables, the next thing we have are these things we call values. Values are numbers, and those values can be anything from -5, -1/4, 2.7, 12, and so forth and so on. So those are values. We have variables and values. Those two things are going to come together to form something we call a term or terms. Here are examples of a term. X minus 5 is an example of a term. Two x is an example of a term. Three x minus 4 is also called a term. These terms come together to create an algebraic expression. So at some point, you will see an expression that looks like this. These now are terms put together to form an algebraic expression. There is one more thing about the algebraic expression that you need to know. Two more things, in fact. One is called a constant. A constant in an algebraic expression would be, for example, this 7. This 7 in this term is called a constant because it's an algebraic expression that has a single value that's separate from any variable or anything else. So this 7 is its own term. A constant is its own term in an expression, and that constant is always expressed as a number. It is always expressed as a number standing by itself. The last thing that you will look at is something called a coefficient. The coefficient in this term is the 2. For example, a coefficient would be -4, -4x. Now, -4x is a term, but -4x is a term that has two pieces to it. There is a coefficient, and then there is a variable. This is the coefficient, in this case, is -4. In this case, the constant number is 7. I need you guys to know what these things are, because once we start to do the evaluation of expressions, once we begin to get into solving equations, you want to know what these things are. Your math teacher wants you to know what these things are, because your math teacher needs to tell you, hey, in order to solve this equation, I want you to look for and combine like terms. When you combine like terms, you are going to see your way clear to solving this equation. If you don't combine like terms, your equation continues to look daunting and something that you can't seem to get your arms around. Now, most of you students who struggle with solving equations, I'm telling you guys this right now up front so everybody knows it. And I need you to also know that your teacher knows this. Most of you guys who struggle with solving equations, the reason you're struggling with solving equations is you don't have a handle on these. And so what you would want to do is to get a handle on what are algebraic expressions before you get into equations. You have to be able to tell the difference between an expression and an equation. What is an expression that has a coefficient? What is an expression that has a constant? What is the constant? What is the coefficient? And in this case, we have not spoken about this yet. You're going to get into also what are exponents. The reason I'm mentioning this to you is the very next thing we're going to do before we jump into breaking down expressions called evaluating expressions and even solving equations is we have to get a handle on this thing we call the order of operations. I'm going to take a quick break and I'm going to come back to you and start with the order of operations, and how to evaluate expressions so that you'll have a handle on how to identify and use these things in order to perform an operation in algebra. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes.